All right, so I've neutralized the language a bit. I wanted to expand the conversation. As we already know, there's a lot of conversation going on in our field and even in our sister fields concerning what it means to be culturally responsive in the general landscape of the workforce. There's so many conversations about what it means to have diversity, equity, and equality. I personally believe we are the specialists for that. So much of our training is focused on what it means to work and serve those who have communication impairments. And with those communication impairments comes the task of differentiating impairment from disorder XYZ. So I'm grateful all of you are here tonight. I'm excited to share on this topic because, like I've mentioned, it is essential to working as an effective clinician with clientele who are and who are not like us. And so I want us to expand the conversation beyond phonology and morphosyntax and have the conversation surrounding what it means to be culturally competent and celebratory as we're moving through speech and language assessment practices. So here's a bit of the formality. We'll probably go a bit away from this. Again, I'm not monitoring your questions right now, but I will make sure to check out any questions at the end. So I just wanted to offer some landscape for us for tonight. I did want to share some objectives. Again, I hope that you get what you need from this presentation, but here's the rundown of the objectives that I've set for our conversation tonight. I want us to be explicit about defining key terms. It's always important to know what we're talking about and to ensure that we're talking about what we say we're talking about. I want us to be able to recall and state the importance of an expansive, culturally, linguistically diverse mindset. So not just the formality of speech and language, but what does it mean to have that mindset in the various environments that we serve? The third objective is that you will be able to connect your personal values to practice. A lot, we're sisters in here, and then we obviously have other professionals who have joined us. And so we go into the work environment with our own set of core goals, core values. And so really tapping into what that looks like in the workforce and to be expansive even in our identities. So I am a Black woman, I am African-American, yet I don't only serve Black and African-American children. And so it's so important to be mindful of the various cultures and perspectives that we serve each and every day. I love that Terry mentioned Chinese New Year this year. You know, some of the lessons I did with my clients was I learned so much about a different culture and was able to explore that with clients. And so just what that mindset means as communication professionals. And then the last objective is I want you to gain resources. And so these resources will be mostly conversational. I took out any tangibles because they were mostly geared towards, pediatric care. And I want this to be a little bit broader. So the key terms I want us to just define and be thinking about and keeping in mind as we go through the presentation are at the bottom. So cultural. What does it mean to be cultural? Obviously, it's relating to the ideas, customs, and social behavior of a society. And that gives us a lot to work with clinically. Ideas and customs and social behaviors, all of those things are governed by one's culture. Linguistic, this is where we shine. This is where we pay the big bucks for our degrees. We understand language and all the elements of language. This is the stuff they teach us in school. And then a lot of the next few terms are often interchanged. When we talk about them, I just want to be explicit for conversation purposes. Responsive, what does it mean to be responsive? It means to react quickly and positively. When you are responsive to something, you are taking the information that's coming to you, be it about someone's culture, and you're responding quickly, but positively. And that positively word is so essential in the work that we do, especially when we're faced with cultural elements that are just unfamiliar or uncomfortable for us. What does it mean to be relevant? That it's closely connected to who we're serving, what we're doing, and it's appropriate to what is being done or considered. So we always want to be relevant. We always want to be relevant to the clients we serve. We want to be relevant to the context by which we serve. And then we want to be sensitive. We want to be able to quickly detect and respond to slight changes in our clinical environments. So being sensitive is not just having empathy, which I'm sure a lot of us are excellent with, but it's being able to quickly detect shifts and changes, and then be the clinician of influence in those moments. All of the others, diversity, equity, inclusion, this is language of our sister and partnering fields in education, business, healthcare, and a lot of this language is describing the concepts that I've mentioned. I just want to throw them in here because I think one of the exciting things that's happening within our field is that although our scope of practice is very clearly defined by ASHA, we as clinicians are expanding on what our professional scope is. And so we're finding ourselves in environments that are not just schools, not just clinics, not just hospitals. And so I think it's important for us to tap into the language of those fields, just to keep our mindsets fresh and relevant to the general context of healthcare and education. All right, so a little bit of an icebreaker. Everyone take a deep breath. If you are in New York or anywhere cold, take a deep breath. I want to do a quick icebreaker for all of us. I want us to just use our imagination. And I'll share you why this image is really special to me. Shout out to my colleague, Allison, who is here. She probably already knows why this image is so special to me. But take a deep breath and imagine you are this child. I would love for anyone to just describe what you imagine your day-to-day life is like as this child, or you could just be yourself, but in this environment. Anyone? I'm not able to see any hand raising or anything right now. I don't want to touch it. So Terry, if you don't mind being my hands for that, if anyone wants to kind of hop in and.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so we have Angela. She states that quite peaceful and relaxed.
Awesome. Okay, quite peaceful and relaxed. I'm sure we would all do that. Imagine your routine if you're in this type of environment.
We also have Jennifer, who says freedom and possibilities.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Any last thoughts?
I'm also thinking peace of mind.
Mm-hmm. Peace of mind. Awesome. I love it. I love it. Okay, so I wanted us to just think about, not only how we attach to this image, but a child in this situation. So really quick anecdote. I had the amazing, phenomenal experience this last year to spend 10 months serving as a speech and language pathologist on the beautiful island of St. Croix. And so that is an island in the U.S. Virgin Islands. There's a total of 3: St. Croix, St. Thomas, and St. John. And this image is of a child, much like the ones that I served, who just live on one of those beautiful islands. And so to us, this image means something very specific. Yet I had a really beautiful awakening when I went into this environment, providing services to these children, that their world was so different. To them, this was home. But what that meant is that when I was looking into or evaluating their language skills and their concept knowledge and their life and families, I had to learn so much. Specifically, what I learned in that experience is a lot of the evaluative materials that I had access to or that we used were so not irrelevant, because we can gain great information from formal assessments, but a lot of the language or the themed concepts that I've grown familiar with assessing were just so foreign to these children. These children, vocabulary surrounding winter, seasonal perspectives, types of garments, types of foods and animals were all so different. And I think it was such an eye opener for me to have that experience, because when I was able to do my analysis of, certain lessons I was presenting, or looking at some of the test items in the vocabulary materials, a lot of these kids would not understand the language because this is their day to day. You don't wear shoes most of the time. So what are boots? What are clogs? There's not a big emphasis on wearing anything other than what we see here. So imagine how different their linguistic systems look, and their semantic knowledge looks, because of their home environments. And so I think that's an important mindset to have, is wherever we are serving, we are there to serve. And so it's so important for us to have not only the observational skills, but the perspective of those we're serving, because that is going to be what shapes not only our assessments, but the decisions we end up making concerning the clients that we serve.
Yes.
I see someone has a hand raised.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if it's meant to be up, but I'm going to look at any questions in the chat later, just to keep us forward flowing.
I just wanted to add, there was more people that stated, like Suzanne Bezier, she said, investigating and inquisitive. There are Carlos Perez Valle, who says lots of playing and exploration in terms to the question that you asked the audience before. And
wonderful thoughts. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all for engaging. So as I've already mentioned, general considerations when we are going into an assessment evaluative experience with clients is that culturally responsive assessments and intervention is not limited to our positions. It's not limited to being a clinician or an administrator or a leader. It's our mindset. It's our mindset of curiosity. It's our mindset of observations. It's those soft skills that we need to really be effective when it comes to making healthcare and educational decisions for the clients that we serve. I'm not going to switch screens because it gets a little bit complicated, yet I wanted to challenge us to, in our own time, look to see if the organizations you serve or the organizations that you work with have clear DEI statements. I will say that that's become very, very important to me as a professional. We know that ASHA does a great job of governing us when it comes to our statements on diversity and equality and what it means to be culturally and linguistically competent. Yet I really, really want to encourage and challenge us to be asking these questions in the greater organizations that we work with, because that is going to impact not only your work as a clinician, but the way that you're able to advocate for your clients, the way that you're able to make the decisions that you need to in order to have equity in the healthcare service that we're providing. So take a moment in your own time to look to see if the organizations that you work for have clear statements. And if not, be asking yourself, is there a way for you to define what it means to have a culturally expansive mindset as you serve those that you serve? So general principles here, I'll just hop into it. I want us all to consider that, as speech and language professionals, we are always serving and working under the general legislative landscape of healthcare and education. And so it's important in your own time to understand disability law, disability rights, cultural equity, and the process by which education or certain health services became accessible to, say, people of color. It's really important to understand where we fit in the general landscape of legislature, because that does color a lot of the decisions that come down from ASHA. And so I encourage each of you, if you're curious, to whatever setting you work in, to just understand a little bit more about the laws surrounding healthcare and education services, because as much as ASHA is amazing at, giving us resources and encouraging our programs to train us a certain way, a lot of times we are capped and limited based on the law. So take a day, be a lawyer. We got it all in the bag, and understand the laws by which you are working under. I just encourage that. All right, we're moving. All right, clinical evaluation. These are the big reasons why we evaluate, right? Evaluations are to identify if there's a medical or academic disorder in the speech and language communication or otherwise area, also to diagnose, for planning and monitoring interventions, for instruction, to know which and how to curate our lesson plans, and then lastly, for accountability. Evaluations are super important for accountability, and we don't talk about that a lot, but from beginning to end of a treatment experience, you want to be able to have measurable, evidence-based decision making. You want to be able to have measurable progress, or not. You want to be able to use data to make those intervention processes. Specifically, it's so important to collect evaluative information that is accurate, because that's the information that it jumpstarts the clinical process for those by which we serve. And it's really important and critical. I know a lot of us, the real world says we get what we get and we don't get upset. I know it can be so challenging, depending on, in all of our environments, to get the best evaluative experience for our clients, because we just have so much to do. Yet what I will offer for sake of conversation is that having a mindset of curiosity, especially concerning cultural and linguistic diversity and equity, is so important, because it's, even if we just have access to formal assessments, it's going to shape how we diagnose, how we plan, how we monitor, how we instruct, and how we hold ourselves accountable to client progress. So having that hat on will allow for any of our evaluative processes to be equitable in the least bit. Again, I've mentioned this, it's so important to understand the legal mandates that govern what we can do, what we can't do, what assessments we can and should use, and those that, are maybe not as known or acceptable because of things like the law, because of insurance reimbursements, because of all of those things. It's so important for us to understand that framework so that we can still advocate effectively. Early on in my career, I told myself this: once you know the rules, you know how to bend them, right? And what that means is, once you understand what our scope of practice is, once you understand the organization you serve in, or the greater landscape of the work you do, you also understand the value of equity and advocacy for clients from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. I won't get into the nitty gritty of BICS and CALP. Those are just, it's just an example of how we can understand and how we are trained to understand developmental and rehabilitative norms, so that we can make clinical decisions when our clients, whether they're children or adults, stray from those norms. So BICS and CALP is an example of how you could do that when working with children. There are a range of healthcare assessments. I can't think of any that come to mind, but I'm thinking of some of the aphasia screeners where, you're orienting clients to time and space and dates. And listen, sometimes people just don't know what day it is ever, right? So having those really open conversations with family members as a part of the evaluative process, and ensuring that what is cognitively appropriate for all is not being overlooked, and what may be cognitively different or experientially or environmentally different for those cultural factors or those cultural nuances, that we're just aware. Another example that comes to mind is, you know, working in, excuse me, I'm reflecting on a time where I did a stint in acute care, and I had this one client, he would not take any of the food offerings. And it wasn't because he was uncomfortable. It wasn't because he wasn't he didn't want to, he just didn't like it. He didn't understand why I would be offering him things like applesauce. He wanted some tapioca pudding. He wanted something with a little bit of flavor, right? And so really being able to step outside of ourselves, to be curious, to be inquisitive about the clients and cultural nuances of those that we serve is so super important to gaining, again, accurate and equitable evaluative information. There is a tool I highlight often. I want to share for those of you who work with kiddos. I really, really do value the diagnostic evaluation of language variation. It is a great starting point for identifying if there is a possible presence of a language variation. It does look at the syntax and phonology of specifically kiddos who may come from a cultural background where those semantic factors or phonetic factors are different. So I do offer that tool because it's a great conversation starter. Even if you never include it in a report, it's a wonderful way to capture what's happening in the child's language. And it also gives you the likelihood of them having a possible language disorder because it looks at contrastive and non-contrastive features. So for those of you who work with kiddos, I highly, highly recommend that you check out the screening tool. There is a bigger battery. I say check out the screening tool as an introduction to these kind of nuanced explorations of cultural and linguistic diversity with kiddos, or competence with kiddos. All right, equity begins at hello. This is an important mindset to have. It's one that I hope we all share. It's hello, how are you? It's bringing that personality into the spaces you serve. It's being aware. It's being conscious of family dynamics. It's treating that person as you would want to be treated, and better, because we are in a position of making some pretty important decisions about the care and future of those we serve. I'm just looking at my notes. It's important that clients who have special needs and who need rehabilitative services to know that they're safe and loved and valued throughout the assessment and intervention process. I know we all have jobs. We work under the mission of those that we serve for, but I really want to encourage all of us to, again, like I mentioned earlier, have an equity statement for yourself, not just for those who look like us sisters, but for everyone. You know, I've served clients who came from Russian backgrounds. I've served clients who, you know, are from Asian backgrounds, and I've found myself so curious to learn. Being in the Caribbean, it's a whole new experience, even if everyone does look like me. Such a different experience. One of the beautiful but nuanced differences about being in the Caribbean is how they greet each other. It's not just good morning, good afternoon. There's also good night, right? Not just as a departure, but as a greeting. Good morning, good noon, good morning, good afternoon, good night. And those are expected. And so just being aware of that social exchange and being present enough. I mean, it's not enough to say, hey, what's up? You good? It's good morning or good day, good night. You know, though that is how you show respect and you engage in that culture. So that's just a nuanced example that I had to adjust to. And I'm sure for those of us who serve in communities that, you know, are not reflective of our origin communities, we have to be aware of those nuances, because that's going to be that's going to be the landscape by which we are assessing folks. I say clinicians can do so by connecting with them on a personal level and celebrating client strengths and perspectives. Another example that comes to mind is, we're sisters in New York, right? My accent and the way that I speak is suited for Northeast. If I go to the South, the clients are going to look at me like something's wrong with me, or I'm going to have a lens of perhaps not understanding, some of the phonetic differences or some of the semantic nuances, and it's important for us to keep that in mind. It's important for us as specialists, as professionals, to keep in mind our own cultural limitations as well, as we are serving in communities. Another example that comes to mind in this is, ASHA did recently issue a statement for, our LGBTQ clients. It's important for us to be comfortable in our professional role with having courageous conversations and having evidence-based, solution-oriented procedures for assessment, intervention, and all of the above. And so it's just, again, I want to expand the conversation because yes, it is about making sure that our people get what they need, but it is also about us showing ourselves approved in the greater landscape of healthcare and education. Our field is wonderful and it's burgeoning, but it's not enough just to understand the technicalities of speech and language and linguistics even. It's important for us to show ourselves approved as we are making interdisciplinary decisions about the clients that we serve. All right. I just wanted to offer perspective. A lot of us, we're professionals. The picture in the top right represents the world. We know that to be the world, whether we've seen it or not. Yet for a lot of our clients, their environment is their world. That is it. I think about the children I served on the island. That is their world. It's important for us to understand that. I think about, my upbringing in New York. A lot of it was very much, corner store, schoolyard. That was the world, or our neighborhoods. And so it is important for us to go into these communities with a sense of wonder. One of the things that I do to give back to the profession is I supervise CFs, and I always encourage them. Their first task with me is to take a spin around the block, meaning take the day to explore your environment. Where are you? What did you notice? What did you see? Are there any, what are the grocery stores looking like? How are there local parks? How, what did you see? Because that is the landscape by which you are now functioning in. You got all the knowledge from school. Where are you now? How are we going to make it make sense? And it's interesting how that first initial experience has challenged a lot of CFs to be like, wait a minute, it doesn't make sense for me to choose this assessment tool because I noticed this, or, oh man, I'm curious about pragmatic language skill of a child of color with, say, autism. Okay, now we have the typical pragmatic behaviors of what I know from research, but then we also have the cultural nuance. How do I make sense of this? And those are the clinical questions that we have to be asking ourselves, and we have to be talking about, okay, how do you consider these cultural nuances as you are operating in a medical framework or in a healthcare framework? These are the characteristics they tell us to look for, yet these are the cultural nuances that they kind of could mirror each other. What clinical decision-making are you going to make? And so just walking CFs through that and walking early career clinicians through those really critical questions has been exciting for me. And so I just want to challenge us, I know we're all seasoned in here. Who are we serving? Who are we serving? And then why? why are we working for the organizations we're working for? You know, I think a lot of us, especially clinicians of color, are now asking ourselves, you know, what does it mean to work for an organization or a school or a hospital that doesn't have a clear DEI statement? How does that color my work? How does that influence or restrict the decisions that I need to make, the very important legal decisions that I'm making? You know, those are the type of questions that I've started to ask myself at this point in my profession. And so I offer that to you. Like I mentioned earlier, I love that Terry wished us or mentioned that there's this Groundhog's Day this year. There's so many, you know, February was full of a variety of holidays. And so it's nice to just, you know, outside of the cultural nuances, just to introduce our kiddos to a range of world experiences. So I am still providing telepractice services to children in the Caribbean. And I was talking to them about Groundhog's Day. That is so Northeast. They're like, what, Miss T, what is this? You know, or, but having those conversations like, oh, well, Miss T grew up every February 2nd, we waited for a groundhog. They're like, what is this animal? Or, you know, some of the sessions were about Chinese New Year, and I was able to have some really courageous conversations about language and culture with one of my kiddos, because he went to mimic what he thinks Chinese language sounds like. You know, he went to mimic it, and I was just like, that's interesting. Have you heard, you know, someone from China speak before? Can we find a video on YouTube? Let's listen to the music. Oh, that's so different than, you know, the kids that I'm serving are in St. Croix. That's so different than Crucian music. That's so different than Crucian dialect. I noticed this. And so really having those open but metacognitive conversations with them, so that their world grows just that much more while we're in an intervention setting. And always bringing it back to, hey, buddy, you work with Miss T because sometimes you speak differently, and we're going to bridge that gap to you. You know, just really having those conversations, bringing it back to evaluation, you know, celebrating those linguistic nuances. You know, the children that I've served in St. Croix, their pronouns at times are just, they're, you know, the she for her, right? So using that is cultural. I do not, I may highlight it like, oh, she is on the beach instead of her is on the beach, but we're not going to mark that on an evaluation, or I'm not going to penalize them. I might have courageous conversations with families about, oh, the dialect is this. This may be an area that, you know, yeah, it's not, there's nothing wrong with it. And just kind of bringing awareness to one's own speaking patterns and having those open conversations about the beauty of language, while also acknowledging that I am a clinically trained professional who implements evidence-based strategies towards the general developmental norms and standards. So really doing that dance with clients, making sure children understand why they're with us, making sure that other stakeholders, administrators, parents, colleagues understand that there is a science to language, and we are challenged to not only rehabilitate it, but to protect it and to celebrate those cultural nuances that our clients bring into their learning experiences. I'm saying a lot of the same, so I just want to highlight here that the process of equitable assessment begins with the mindset of equity and the belief that all clients can learn or be rehabilitated despite their cultural and environmental nuances. I think it goes without saying, and this might be a little bit tongue-in-cheek, yeah, I think our field as a whole can celebrate at times a perspective and mindsets of privilege, right? And what I mean by that is a lot of us clinicians, or those of us who choose this field, we tend to be a certain type of way, right? We do have a mastery of language. We are intelligent. We are smart. We love science and creativity and all of those things. And sometimes we bring our personal identities into the clinical environment. And we can have an air about us. And so I just want to encourage for those of us who are serving, those who are and who are not like us, those who are reflective of other parts of our life or cultures we're not familiar with, that we are in service, that it's important for us to remember that beyond our degree, beyond our training, we are service and helping professionals who are charged and trained to be to be curious, to be solution oriented, to, like I said, bend the rule, know the rules, yet bend them for the benefit of our clients, and to advocate for what is right. And so whatever that means to you in the settings you serve, it's just so important for us to be mindful of how we show up as professionals, right? There is the professional hat we have to keep on, but there's also the human hat that we have to be reminded of in specifically our assessment procedures, and that carries through intervention. Wanted to just offer some practical implications. There's some research, there's some articles at the end. If anyone's interested, I will send this presentation because there's some really great evidence that just promotes equitable assessment procedures. There are different models that, again, we can adopt as our own, individual clinicians. Caregiver aspiration model. This is having open communication with families in whatever setting about what the goals are. I know in the schools it can be a little bit more challenging because we need to make sure that those goals are academically focused. Yet for those of us who work in outpatient environments or, more clinic-based settings, having the conversation, what's the goal here? I know what Brown Sages tells me the goals should be here, or I know what this aphasia assessment tells me here, but what are the goals? For some, it's, I want my child to be able to, I want my child to be able to enjoy a family function. When we talk about the cookout, I want my child to be functional at the cookout. What does that look like? What skills do they need for that? How can we have critical conversations and functional conversations about goal setting that are in alignment with the developmental norms or the rehabilitative norms that we set. I remember when I was I had an acute care placement. I worked with this gentleman. He wanted to drink a beer. That's what he wanted. He did not want this apple juice. He wanted a beer. And so with the collaboration of the family, we had to thicken it up, but he tasted the beer. That's what he wanted. So it's about having those conversations with the families, making sure that the screening tools that we use are developmentally appropriate, that they're hitting on those cultural and linguistic important nuances, or that we use the beautiful world of Google, Wikipedia to understand those cultural things that we, maybe there's not an article that can lead us to what to do in this situation, but our clinical perspective is broad enough that we're curious to, do a quick search on, okay, what are the general pragmatic norms for someone who is in an Asian or from a Chinese background? I don't know, but I want to know so that when I'm looking at that client, I'm aware. And then professional developments. I know we've got this in the bag because we're here. Just making sure that we are taking in knowledge ever ever growing, being committed to being lifelong learners. What I knew last week is not the same. It may not even be relevant, that word relevant, to what I need to know this week. And so professional development is so critical and important. And I encourage professional developments outside of our field. I mean, we have such a breadth of knowledge, but really tapping into some of the healthcare resources or whatever setting you're in, to show yourself as wanting to be well-versed in what's going on. Professional mandates, these are ones that I set for myself and I just offer them. Connect yourself to client. There's always a point of connection. We're in there to serve a role, but there's always a point of connection. We are human first. Having a heart of servitude. So, I mean, we all have days where we just got to get the work done. Yet, you know what? There's such a huge difference in how you show up to work when it's, I got to work, or when I'm here to serve, and then learning something new. I love learning something new. The clients I've worked with, the teams I've served on, I've learned something new. And I've had to accept that I don't know everything. But I'm always willing to, and we're always willing to, should always be willing to be resourceful. This is just cute visual. All clients can learn no matter what. Some research, obviously we want to be evidence-based. I just want to offer some general research that supports the presentation. The first particular article focused on emphasis on school environment and evidence-based intervention strategies. The focus of this article specifically in schools was centered around being trauma-informed. There's a lot of research that's come out in our cousin field of social work and psychology on what it means to be trauma-informed, not just going in saying, oh, I'm working with children of color, cool. I need to understand the, linguistic elements of how they speak, but no, understanding that trauma can look a lot like a communication disorder, or family cycles can contribute to certain types of communication presentation. So just being aware of that. The second article is focused on celebrating cultural and linguistic diversity within the environments that we serve, banishing the mindset of other. Like I've mentioned, my experience in the Caribbean, I had a lot to learn, just concerning different foods that they ate, or the different reference for friends and family. Like all of that became very critical in my work with the clients I served there. Even something so nuanced as the intonation. So I noticed a lot of the kiddos that I served, they had this, do you want to play with me? Like they had this intonation that just, it was strange to me. I was just like, that's not quite right. Yet when I was able to do informal analysis of speaking patterns, that is the way that a lot of the Crucians that I spoke to marked emphasis, that rising intonation. To me, it was just like, what is this? So just something to be, just an anecdote to share. And then the last article is really the focus on family or caregiver engagement as central to the intervention process. It's so important to ask not only background questions, but, in the event that this client does need services, what do you want to see? What's the point? Because it's always going to be a collective and collaborative process by which we professionals work with families and clients. I love, or I have always hung my hat on the term related service provider, right? That's what we're called when we serve in the schools. And it makes total sense. What we do as clinicians is good in a silo, right? Because it's science, but what we do in connection to the greater functionality of our clients is so much more impactful, so much more beneficial. We want to be related to the grander landscape of our client's life. And so that's kind of a mindset that I've offered. And for children, a lot of that is, what's the function in their families? What's the function in their families? And then another little Tamika-ism: clients deserve to be valued even in their weaknesses. And this is speaking to, we do have clients that have significant either developmental or rehabilitative weaknesses. That is where our training comes in. We need to be able to intervene and provide intervention that is still culturally responsive and relevant to those we serve. And then here's just some fun references. I think we can't just come up with what I want to say from my mind. So there's some references. Again, I will share this with Terry to share with those of you who have registered, just to hop into some of the literature. But there's so much out there right now on being culturally responsive, DEI initiatives. I guess the general takeaways would be that when we are evaluating, it starts with our mindset. I didn't want to spend this presentation, this tool and this tool. We are all professionals. You know what materials you need to use. Yet it's so important for us to continue to have a mindset of curiosity and examination and analysis in the environments where we are less comfortable, where we are less familiar, so that we can not only have accurate assessment outcomes, but they can be equitable and they can be solid, and that the decisions we make throughout the clinical process are holistic in how we serve and love our clients. So that's all I had. I hope that it was in some ways impactful or thought-provoking. I would love for us to open up the conversation.